Hello, students. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this narrated PowerPoint in lieu of us having class today. So, we are going to have an assignment, your last research assignment, based on this presentation. So I'm really glad that you guys are taking time to listen to it from beginning to end. We're going to talk about some of the important ways to approach your research, whether you're going to start on the internet or you're starting on Westlaw or Lexis. We're going to talk about terms or connectors or Boolean searching. And I'm also going to try to show you guys some tips on how to be more efficient on Westlaw and Lexis. Lastly, I'm going to show you guys Google and Google Scholar and ways to be effective on those sites, as well as the use in public library site. So let's just do a quick review of the difference between researching in the books and researching electronically. I know that many students really prefer electronic research, and there's nothing wrong with that. I want to remind you why the books can be really helpful. Books, particularly researching in the digest or secondary sources or even statutes, are really helpful because they are always organized by subjects, right? So if you're looking up a particular subject, you just have to look up that subject, brainstorm your search terms, and think of the different subtopics. Electronic searching, you really have to have some skill at it. If you know your specific search terms, if you've figured out those legal terms of art because you specialize in that area or you've already went through a secondary source, then you should be fine with electronic searching. Electronic searching is not a good way to just sit at the computer all day and throw in a bunch of terms if you don't know those specific legal terms of art. You end up wasting time, you end up wasting money, and you end up really just frustrating yourself. So let's talk about how to be more efficient. So first of all, since many of you like electronic searching, please keep in mind that there are many free searches and search engines out there. There are court websites, Fifth Circuit, Sixth Circuit, Southern District. Everybody has a court website these days. There are also a lot of general legal research sites like FindLaw, that's a free one, and Lois Law. This can be a great way to supplement your research. I don't think it's the best starting point. The reason I don't think it's the best starting point is one of the reasons that Westlaw and Lexis has become so successful is they have these wonderful editorial enhancements. And it really helps you save time to see in the head note or in the synopsis, for example, what the focal point of a particular case is going to be, as opposed to you having to skim through a bunch of cases that don't have any kind of editorial enhancement. So that's why I think you should supplement your research with some of the free sources. I don't think it's a starting point. Now, here is my one exception to that rule, and that is Google Scholar. And we're going to talk about Google Scholar in a few moments. So one thing I want you guys to remember, a couple of things. I need you guys to think beyond Wexis. That's Westlaw or Lexis combined. Now I know some of you feel you have one favorite over the other. Let me remind you, unless you plan to work for yourself, the choice of which you use is usually not going to be up to you. Your employer is going to decide if they're going to sign a contract with Westlaw or Lexis. So even if you think you like one over the other, I strongly encourage you to make sure you are familiar and proficient in both systems. I also want you to know that Lexis typically has more competitive pricing for solo practitioners. So if you think that you're a whiz at Westlaw, make sure you get to know Lexis too, because you may not be able to afford both engines. Now, there are also limited jurisdiction products available. I think either Westlaw or Lexis will sign a contract with you if you just want Texas and federal materials instead of the type of access you have now. As a law student, you have access to everything, right? You can search any state, all the federal stuff, all the secondary sources to your heart's desire. But when you get out in practice, those are really expensive databases. So one way to save money is to think about just limited jurisdiction products or CD-ROM products. I also want to touch on the library. I'm not sure how many of you have a use in public library card, And you may think it's kind of odd for me to be talking about it in a legal research and writing class, but this can be a really important tool. Oftentimes when we do research, we need to start thinking about interdisciplinary research and really thinking outside the box. One example I like to share was actually a failure I had. It was the one felony case I lost. I was very successful in all the cases I prosecuted except this one, and it stays with me to this day. It was a very bad failure to stop and render aid car accident. Teenager or young adult going too fast, hit a car that ricocheted off another car and ricocheted off another car, and the police just thought it was an automobile accident, when in fact the third car that ricocheted had a woman in the passenger seat whose head bounced off the car, and she got brain damage. And the police didn't know it at the time. The husband didn't know it at the time because he didn't have to take her to the hospital until she started presenting symptoms a few, hours after the crash. So it ended up being a much more serious case than anyone imagined. And the sad thing about that is the police didn't treat it as a serious car injury with serious bodily injury. They just treated it as a regular old car accident, and it wasn't. So here I am getting ready for trial, and the defense attorney puts on some testimony about the tire tracks in the road to suggest that his client actually stopped the vehicle. Now let me tell you something. You're not going to find any research on Westlaw or Lexis about tire tracks. Nor are you going to find anything really useful on Westlaw or Lexis about post-traumatic stress disorder, battered women syndrome, blood spatter evidence. All of those things, you really need to think outside the box. Westlaw and Lexis are going to give you court cases that have touched on the things, but they're strictly legal. They're not going to really lay that foundation. So I say that, it was very upsetting to me. We lost the case. I thought we should have won, but we lost it. And it taught me a valuable lesson about not just limiting my preparation and research to legal databases, and really thinking about all the particular ways you can address a problem. This is going to be really useful for those of you who are going into criminal law, but also civil law when you think about the different damages that are available. So anytime we do interdisciplinary research, we need to get away from Westlaw and Lexis. And one great way to do that is with the Power Card. And up on this screen, this is exactly what it looks like. This is what my library card looks like. And we're going to visit that database today. Let's touch on internet searching, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Okay, so on the internet, there's great stuff and there's bad stuff. A good place to start would be the library page because the librarians did a really good job of compiling lists for us, and you guys know about that because of our library tour. What's really helpful is they have information on different search engines, federal resources, state resources, Texas legislative information. So even after you graduate years from now, this library is still going to be here and you'll have access to the website as graduates. So I encourage you to think about starting here if you really like to do internet research. When you think about diving into the World Wide Web, think about these things. What do you need? Are you looking for something in depth, or are you looking for a general overview? The internet's fine for a general overview. It's not necessarily going to give you in-depth information. You're going to find a lot of attorneys, for example, that will write little quick articles on a particular area of law, and they won't give you any citations. Well, that's not particularly helpful because what you really need are some good landmark cases in the particular area to get your research started. Sometimes the internet can save you time. If you're really looking for preliminary research or recent information, it can also waste your time if the information is inaccurate. And believe me, there's still a bunch of junk on the internet. You will find as you continue going through and trying to go through legal research that sometimes it's going to be quicker just to go straight to the books. When you think about accuracy, know that the internet has accurate information and inaccurate information. Look for obvious mistakes, grammar and typos. Do the hyperlinks work? Think about those journalism questions. The journalism questions of who, where, why, when. In terms of who wrote this webpage? If it's anonymous, if you don't want to sign your name to a webpage, I don't know if I can trust the information that's up there. Is it an author or a sponsoring body that is well known or respected? They should be willing to clearly identify themselves. If it's a regular author as opposed to a body or a corporation, use a search engine for the name and find out who that person is. Is this a scholar in this area, or is this just some person who just has opinions and they decide to do a web page? Think about the domain. Is it .gov? Those are usually some good sites to go to. .edu for education, .org, a nonprofit organization, or is it commercial? .com, .net, mil, int. Those are things you should be looking at. Keep in mind, if they have the tilde sign attached to the address, it could be just a piggyback where some other person created a personal website that's associated with something official, but it still really isn't an official site. A very important thing that I want you guys to look at is why. What's the purpose of the site? Let's say I decide to give you an abortion problem. Now, if I gave you an abortion problem and if you decided that the best place to start your research is on the internet, I promise you, you're going to see a whole lot of opinions out there. When you're on the internet, think about why the document was written. Are they trying to inform you, or do they have an agenda? Who is the target audience? Are they being truly objective or persuasive? Now, even a persuasive site can be accurate, but they may leave out important information. Finally, don't forget the when. Currency is so important. When was this website created? When was it last updated? Now, if you print something from the website and it has today's date and the recent time, that has nothing to do with when the website was created or when it was last updated. That's just something computer generated. Instead, look for language that talks about last updated or last modified. Things that are hard to find on the internet can include older cases, like more than 2 years old, editorial enhancements and annotations, scholarly legal commentary, although it's getting more popular now, and historical information. So I want to spend the last few minutes talking about Google Scholar. And there are other Google things, but I think Google Scholar has become my favorite. Here are just a list of different ways you can use Google more effectively. And I think the best thing for me to do with that is to show you instead of just talking about it. I also, as we start talking about Westlaw and Lexis, want to tell you a little bit about word searching. It's also known as Boolean or terms and connectors. I'm not sure how many of you already have experience with terms and connectors or Boolean, but I think it's really important if you're going to be effective and efficient with internet research and research on Westlaw and Lexis that we get as much practice as possible. So here's the underlying theory behind Boolean or terms or connectors. Now, we know when we see a court opinion from a judge that it usually is going to have certain words in a document near each other. Your goal is to find the right words, and then hopefully you're going to find the right documents. Now, in the background of Westlaw and Lexis and even Google Scholar, there are all these algorithms working to try to make sure you get the documents that you need to have. Now, the database is going to just look for the words that you enter. Terms and connectors or Boolean searching will get those documents in the case based on the relationship among the words. Not just the words, but how the words relate to one another. So many of you have already worked on Google. When you use Google, you usually add some terms, take away some terms, and you just kind of hit or miss till you get what you're looking for. I'm going to try and encourage you guys to take that methodology a little further and start adding connectors to show the relationship amongst or between your search terms. Before you type, think about what legal terms of art would a judge use to describe this problem. You've got to think about the jargon, the specifics. That's why those secondary sources can be really valuable in helping you locate those key legal terms of art, giving you background information. Even a law review article can give you some good key legal terms of art. You also want to brainstorm. For example, a lot of my scholarship focuses on the area of domestic violence. Anytime I'm doing research in domestic violence, I don't just stop with that term. I would, in that domestic violence example, also look at things like interspousal abuse, battered women syndrome, interpersonal violence, and other words that mean the same thing as domestic violence or domestic abuse. So you will always want to do a good job with your synonyms. Root words are also an important thing to consider. So if you want to search for something like service of process, you may want also that the person was served. Well, you can do SERV exclamation point, and that's your root extender. It will get you words like served, serving. It will also come up with servant. So in terms of defining the relationship in a terms of connector search, you're going to assume that your documents not only have the words that you're looking for, but they're going to have certain words near each other. The logic in terms of the connectors that you'll be focusing on include and, or, the word not. W/N stands for within a certain number, or W/S within the same sentence, or W/P within the same paragraph. For example, if I went to a digest and decided to find some cases on breach of contract, I could just start with the broad topic of contracts and find the subtopic of breach of, and I'd find cases. For electronic searching, I need to figure out my terms and try to connect them together, because certainly I don't want millions of documents that just happen to mention the word breach somewhere and then just happen to mention the word contract on page 50. When you use the Boolean term or, you're basically asking the computer to look for one of these terms or the other. It's really helpful when you're talking about synonyms. Keep in mind, when you use or, you typically tend to get more records. For Westlaw, just using the space bar counts as or. And is going to result in fewer records. That means that the computer has to get documents that have all of these search terms present. If you know that the words can be quoted, you can always put quotation marks. This will work in both Westlaw and Lexis. And then my favorite are the proximity connectors, near. It's like a restrictive and, where it determines the closeness of the terms. You can also do a digest like searching online through Westlaw Custom Digest or Key Search or Lexis Search Advisor. Don't forget, you can use both Shepard's on Lexis or Keysight on Westlaw to add search terms or restrictions to further your research. One way that students really like to do research is by going on to Google. Now, there are some ways that Google can be very helpful, and there are some other ways not so much. So let's talk about ways that Google can be helpful to us. So if you were going to do something about oral arguments, for example, all right, notice you get all of these interesting things about oral arguments, but if your goal was to learn about oral arguments for the purpose of class, it may not be particularly helpful. But if I did oral arguments and I added a file type, and I really wanted PowerPoints, then I would just type in space file type :PPT for PowerPoints. And now look, everything I have is a PowerPoint from other law schools giving you guys tips on how to do, oh, I guess that's some PDFs there, on how to do your oral argument. Let's see. I think what I did wrong is I put a space there. Let's try this again. Okay, now everything is a PowerPoint or PDF. Same is true if I wanted PDF documents, I would just put file type PDF and I would get nothing but PDFs. But what about doing research from Google? Is that really helpful? Well, I don't think so. Let's try sexual harassment. Now we get a governmental website and some other things, but not particularly helpful for someone who's trying to do legal research. I would suggest if you really are dying to do some legal research just to get started, preliminary research, that you go to Google Scholar. So this is Google Scholar. And let's see what happens when I do the same search here, sexual harassment. Now right now I've included just articles, not case law. Now they have lots of important, serious articles on here about sexual harassment, not the Wikipedia stuff that we had seen earlier. Let's go back to Google Scholar. And this time I want the same term, sexual harassment, but I want to look at case law. Okay? Now let's start with federal cases. Now you may recognize some of these cases, and I can tell you as I practiced labor and employment law for a number of years, that these are some of the landmark Supreme Court cases dealing with sexual harassment. Okay, so in the background of Google Scholar are some pretty good algorithms going to find some of the most important cases. Now here's a drawback. If you click on the case, notice that you don't get any of the helpful editorial enhancements that you may be used to. For example, you know how you usually get a synopsis of the case and you usually get maybe some head notes? None of that. This just goes straight into the opinion and it just highlights the term sexual harassment, which means it may take you a little bit longer to look through the case, but at least you're getting some of the important cases early on. Let's go back, and on the left side of the bar, I don't know if you can see it well because it may be cut off a little bit by the screen, is Texas courts. Notice I came up with a case from Texas Supreme Court, Hoffman LaRoche. Waffle House is an important case. A lot of important cases in the area of sexual harassment for Texas. So this is a good way to use, if you really want to use Google, I would start off with Google Scholar. I'm next going to compare how this also looks on Westlaw and Lexis. Okay, so we're here at the Westlaw page and we just left Google Scholar looking at sexual harassment. Let's see how Westlaw and Lexis fares. So we just click on Westlaw. And Lexis and Westlaw are getting more and more similar. It's almost like a Google search here. You just select your database. In this case, I want Texas. If I want to include federal, I do here. Try to resist looking at all jurisdictions because when you get out in practice, that can be a very expensive search. Focus on the jurisdiction that you're most interested in. And in this case, that's Texas. Let's pretend I'm a student who just likes the normal Google search. And I'm just going to type in sexual harassment. I don't know any legal terms of art. And I'm just going to go for it. Well, Westlaw starts off with the overview section. If I click on cases, wow, I have 662 cases. Now keep in mind, all I said was sexual harassment. So this is just cases that mention sexual harassment, but not necessarily so prominently in the opinion where they're really going to be relevant to what I'm looking for. How can I narrow this down? Well, by terms and connectors, or the Boolean connectors I mentioned before. We can do that. Start off pretty broadly. Let's see what happens if I put quotation marks. It shouldn't matter because I think for Westlaw purposes, quotation marks are like the same thing. Oh, maybe not. That got it to 455. Now let's try if I did sexual in the same paragraph as harassment. Now keep in mind, anytime you do terms and connectors in Westlaw, it's going to add the word ADV for advanced search. And that gave me 556 cases. That's still quite a bit. What if I said, okay, find sexual in the same sentence as harassment? Well, now I'm down in terms of cases to 502. What if I said within 3 words? of the word harassment. Well, now, that didn't help. That gives me 469. So that's a lot of cases. So let me show you guys, in addition to terms and connectors, one good way to focus your research. Let's click on one of the cases, the Waffle House case. Notice as an editorial enhancement, Westlaw gives us a synopsis and followed by several headnotes. Lexis does the same thing. I think Lexis calls it a summary. Westlaw calls it a synopsis. These paragraphs in the beginning of cases can be very useful to you. And my theory is this: if the terms that I'm looking for are truly the focal point of the case, they will be included in the synopsis. So one thing that I like to do when I'm searching, I'm going to go back to my search, is I like to do what's known as a synopsis digest search. And that's basically when you're looking for a field restrictor that only looks at the synopsis and digest. To do that, I have to type SY, comma, DI, parentheses, and then I'll add my term of sexual harassment. Now, let's see what happens if I just put in parentheses. Quotation marks. Down to 159 cases. This is the first time I got a search down to the 100s, which sounds a lot more manageable than 600 and 500 and 400, right? So let's see what happens if I, instead of quotation marks, I want to put sexual within 3 words or 2 words of the term harassment. All right, that still gives me quite a bit at 166. Well, what if I actually listened to my professor and I included some legal terms of art? Like, for example, quid pro quo. So let's try quid pro quo. And that can be anywhere in the document as far as I'm concerned. Now suddenly I'm down to 33 cases here. Another thing you want to keep in mind is that I can do this same similar search. If I just want to do synopsis digest, sexual within 3 of harassment, and I have my 100 and odd cases, 166, I can just go to the middle here where it says narrow, and then I can type quid pro quo, and then apply filters, and that gets me to 38 cases. So that's a helpful way to do all of that in Westlaw. Next, we're going to look at Lexis. So we're going to leave Westlaw and go to Lexis. This is the Lexis page, Lexis Advanced. Just click on Lexis Advanced. And it takes me to a screen that is very similar. I need to figure out my database. In this case, it's going to be Texas. And let's do that broad search where I just do sexual harassment. Well, I've got mine set up to go to secondary materials because I like secondary materials. But let's go to cases. I've got 544 cases. That was not helpful at all, was it? I can do the same thing on Lexis as I did on Westlaw. I can do sexual with the same paragraph as harassment. And that brings us down to 600 cases. I can do sexual with the things within the same sentence. Now it looks like we're at 500. I can do it within 3 words. And that gets us to 512. That's quite a lot of cases. So the way I can be a little bit more focused in this, just like synopsis digest exists in Westlaw, in Lexis it's called summary. So I do summary, open parentheses, close parentheses, sexual within 3 of harassment. And now I'm down to something more manageable in the hundreds. Similarly, I can do in quid pro quo. Go back to cases, because as you know, I like the secondary materials. 32 cases. Or I can go down here to the middle of the screen where it says narrow by and type in quid pro quo here. I just have to push return and I'll get those same 32 cases. So those are ways to be a little bit more efficient on Westlaw and Lexis. Let's pull up a case and see what we're looking at here. All right, I've got Hoffman LaRoche. I've got my head notes. All right, yeah, it's the same basic case. There was another something, let's see, that just gives me my head note. Something else I wanted to show you, but I don't think that's it. No, that's not it. Okay, so that's all we're going to do for Lexis until or unless I find out that one little trick I wanted to show you. The last really helpful thing I want to show you guys is just using the basic Use in Public Library page. And I think people really take this for granted. Now the library card today is called MyLink, but when I had my library card, I still have it, it was called the Power Card, but either still works. If you go to research, you can go to by category. Let's just go by category and see what happens. So you can actually click on law. And they're going to have some pretty decent resources available and some websites already ready for you. Ordinances, for example, can be kind of difficult to find, so you've got that, different regulations, and so on. What I really like to do is look at journals and periodicals, so I'm going to look at it alphabetically. And I can tell you, out of all the hundreds of databases they have, my favorite is right under A, Academic Search Complete, part of TechShare, that includes scholarly publications. Now, I have already entered my library card, that's why I didn't ask for it. But at this point, once you select the database, it's going to stop you and say, okay, are you in the group? Do you have a library card number? I like to go to Advanced Search, and I just like to type my terms. So if I want to look up something like self-defense, that'll be my first one. Now I can do a keyword search or any kind of fields. I'm just going to keep it general. And maybe I also want to look up the term deadly force. All right, but I don't want just a bunch of newspaper articles, so let me go back. And go to scholarly or peer-reviewed. Now keep in mind, I also could have done that. Let's see. Here. Over here where it says scholarly peer-reviewed journals, I could have clicked the button here. So either one works. And here we have some PDF full text for free articles. Where are we getting these articles from? Well, this is the Harvard Journal on Legislation. Here's Berkeley Journal of Law and Gender. So look at this, Toledo Law Review. And of course I did Marquette Law Review. Now, all of a sudden, I have access to law reviews and journals for free without paying money on Westlaw or Lexis to access them. That's a pretty big and important deal. What if I want to do a different search? What if now I want to do something on eyewitness identifications? I'll just do eyewitness, and I'll use the connector and identification. And I still really want those scholarly articles. All right, I've got a lot of things. First thing that came up was Texas Law Review. I'm not sure what this is from. Mr. Yoakum. Looks like it's the 10th volume of something called One, some kind of journal there. It's a PDF version. Let's see what else we have. Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences of the United States of America. Oh, that's interesting, on our witness identifications. What else do we have here? Got something in a different language. That's a European Journal of Psychology. And here we have the legal and criminological psychology. Now, something like this is not going to be on Westlaw or Lexis. So what's really helpful about being able to go onto something like the Houston Public Library webpage is that you really do a good job of getting access to interdisciplinary research, which is just so important. Here's a policing magazine, applied cognitive psychology, confidence and eyewitness identifications, the cross-race effect. So let's imagine you have an expert witness testifying. Before you can really give a direct examination or a cross-examination of the expert, you need to have a handle on what they're going to testify. You don't need to make yourself an expert, but you at least need to know some of the jargon. And you're not going to really know or understand that jargon if you don't do that background research first. Let's say someone wants to come up with the battered women's defense. So let's say I want something on domestic violence and PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Well, I'm already got scholarly things. Let's see what I'm coming up with. Here's the Journal of Child and Family Studies. Attachment security and parental perception of competency among abused women in the shadow of PTSD and childhood exposure to domestic violence. Sounds very scholarly. Also, the Child and Family Social Work Journal. These are journals that you cannot find on Westlaw or Lexis. And here I'm getting access to them for free. Now I mentioned that we have a PDF. Let me open the PDF so you'll see what it looks like. There it is. And you can print it from your own computer for free. So this is another good way to do cost-effective research, especially, we talk about the importance of figuring out those legal terms of art, and some of you are having problems looking at the law review articles in the journals. Here's a great free way to access those things without paying a dime. And if you're out on your own or if you have a client, you need to figure out cost-saving measures to do your research.